Today's episode is brought to you by the Consultancy Growth Network. As you'll know, I'm a big believer in learning from people who've achieved the things that you want to. It's why I run this podcast, to share the stories of consulting leaders and how they've got to where they are today. So when I started talking to Mark Jansen and the team at Consultancy Growth Network, it was clear there was an obvious fit between climate consulting and their mission and what they are building with their network. But you're probably asking, what is the Consultancy Growth Network? The Consultancy Growth Network is the leading community of boutique consulting leaders. It brings together seasoned consulting growth experts who successfully scaled their own boutiques, with rapidly growing consulting founders looking to emulate their success. Now, you might be thinking, who are these growth experts? What do they actually know about consulting? And this is one of the most exciting things that personally I find about the network. The team at the Consultancy Growth Network have searched far and wide for some of the best boutique consulting leaders to help their members on their journeys, some of which I have previously interviewed for this podcast, such as Don Morehouse and Augusto Negrillo. But it's not just the insights from these people that you will benefit from. By joining, you get access to their jam-packed calendar of regular in-person and online events, their comprehensive growth hub of resources, and their active Slack community. Through all of these channels, you can learn, solve challenges, and achieve the goals you want for your firm. And now, if that wasn't enough reason to sign up, the Consultancy Growth Network is giving all listeners to this podcast a special sign-up offer. If you join for 12 months, you join for that next year, you will get your 13th month for free, giving you that extra month to continue to build on everything you're learning and continue to benefit from the network. To sign up, just visit consultancygrowthnetwork.com or contact their partnerships director, Luke at consultancygrowthnetwork.com. And when you're talking about joining, mention Create Engage or Climbing Consulting, and you will get that special sign-up offer. Hi, and welcome to today's episode of Climbing Consulting. In this one, we do something a little different, as I wanted to share a fantastic conversation from our brand new podcast, Brand and Deliver, hosted by my colleagues, Dan and Alex. As you will know, as a marketing agency, we work day in, day out with consulting businesses, with their partners, with their CEOs, and also with some fantastic heads of marketing. And we know that there are some brilliant people doing amazing marketing who want advice and support on that topic exactly. So that's why we launched Brand and Deliver. Today, I wanted to share a fantastic interview from that podcast with an expert in consulting, the only professor of consulting, someone who's written more books on our industry than I think anybody else, and a former guest on climate consulting. That is Joe Omani, professor of consulting at Cardiff University and strategic advisor to consulting leaders across the globe. In this conversation, Joe, Dan, and Alex dive deep into how to focus your consultancy's proposition and how to use marketing to help you scale. In terms of what they talk about, they cover some fantastic topics, all of which I know will help you, including the importance of crafting a crystal clear value proposition, equally the power of no and why you need to be really niche when you are building your service offering. They talk about actually the power of some of those more traditional marketing and BD approaches, such as picking up the phone when today we are bombarded with everything digital. And they explore getting deep into marketing, looking at why high-quality, reusable thought leadership is key to positioning you as a trusted advisor. And Joe also shares his take on AI and what it means for the consulting market at large. There is so much content in this one to help you really hone your brand, your marketing, your go-to-market, and I know you won't want to miss it. So that is why I am very pleased to share it on Climb in Consulting today. If you would like to listen to more conversations like this, you'd like to listen to more of the interviews that we have from Brand and Deliver, you can go to createengage.co.uk/podcasts and you can find it right there, all of the interviews that we have done so far. And likewise, if you have anyone to recommend, anyone you would like to listen to, please do share. We're always looking for fantastic heads of marketing to interview for the show. And with that intro done, all that's left to say is please enjoy today's extra special conversation that does not feature me, but features two of my great colleagues, Dan and Alex, and one fantastic guest, Joe Omani.
Today, we are very lucky to be joined by Professor Joe Omani. I'm sure many of our listeners will already be familiar with Professor Joe and his work, but for those who are not, Joe is a professor of consulting at Cardiff University and the advisor to consulting and tech leaders who want to scale their firms, add value, and achieve their exit goals. Having worked with hundreds of clients during his years in consulting, Joe has an incredible amount of knowledge and insight to share, and I'm sure a fair few stories to tell, and we're delighted that he's able to join us for this episode of Brand and Deliver. So Joe, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be here. Thanks for having me on.
So let's get started. As a leading authority on the growth and sale of boutique and small consulting firms, your expertise, experience, and knowledge of this space is wide-ranging, from growth strategies to leadership coaching. But today we want to focus on one aspect of it, marketing, and the role it plays in successfully growing a consultancy. So I'd like to kick off there. In your opinion, what role does marketing play, and how important is it when it comes to growing a firm?
Okay, so thank you. Good question, general question, but it's a good start off. So, I mean, obviously, it's a leading question as well. So I'm going to say, yes, of course, very important. We can't spend enough money on marketing, but it's not always the type of marketing that people think of, because people typically think of digital marketing, SEO, email campaigns, podcasts, newsletters, whatever. And don't get me wrong, those do have their place. But there's another side of marketing which is equally as important, but not always talked about, which is working out what your consultancy should be about, talking to your clients about what they think about you, looking at your competitors and where you sit in comparison to your competitors. And then there's another form of marketing, which is the more traditional marketing that I think we're going to move on to later. So my focus is on seeing things from a buyer's perspective, and a buyer is interested in profitable growth, EBITDA, keeping your costs down, repeat clients, and all the rest of it. Marketing can help you fill the top of the funnel in terms of, sort of outbound marketing, etc. But it can also enable you, if you're talking about competitor analysis and market analysis, it can also allow you to offer more better positioned services, a better defined value proposition. And those things allow you to increase the top line as well as the bottom line.
And would you say that that is a challenge that a lot of firms that you work with have? Do they have that niche, that proposition, those service offerings defined, or is that something that you start with as when you're talking to firms about marketing and growth? Is that something that is if you don't have this, you start here?
So my area of advisory is typically firms between 20 and 120 employees. I would say that a third of firms, maybe not even that, maybe a quarter of firms that I encounter at the first stage don't have a clear value proposition. They're perhaps offering too many services. Perhaps they're competing in a market that is declining. And perhaps they have never had their clients feed back to them about what they really like about the firm and then what their value proposition should be. So there's always the strategic question, which is, are you doing the right things? In some ways, there's no point investing a whole pile of cash into content creation and distribution if you're not confident that what you're selling is the right thing. And sometimes with some relatively small, it doesn't mean you need to necessarily offer different services. Sometimes it's about describing your services in different ways. So I would say the majority of smaller firms haven't got that right yet. On the more digital side of marketing, it's not really until firms get to the 50-person size that many of them feel confident about investing significantly in marketing, beyond having a web page and a few blogs that no one reads and putting a few things out on LinkedIn. I guess that the risk there is that, and you guys would know this because they're not your main competitors, but they do erode the market somewhat. There's a lot of dodgy charlatans out there offering, strategic marketing services and growth services. And in effect, all they're doing is building a funnel for your firm. And that's a waste of money as far as I can see it.
And of firms that are at that, as you say, you mentioned there that when firms get to that sort of 50 size, that's when they start to think we need to invest in that digital marketing side of it or marketing side of it a little more seriously and professionalize that function. Why is that the tipping point? Is it a case of they've grown to a point and want to accelerate, or they are grown to a point where they feel like they need to professionalize all functions within their business to kind of build that sort of robustness, I suppose?
Yeah, I guess there's a few things. Number one, once you get to that size, it's hard to get beyond 30 people. And don't get me wrong, I've seen much larger firms not have this capability. It's typically hard to get beyond 30 people and not know what you're about. And so this is really the shift that a lot of firms make from the growth phase to the scale phase. And the growth phase, which can go up to 50 people, but typically is dealt with by the time they're at 30 people, you're really working out what you should be about. What are the growth markets? Where can you charge a lot of money? What services are more likely to grow? Once you've worked out what you're about, you know what levers to pull in order to scale your business, which is why at that phase, some companies go to private equity so they can get the money to invest in the right levers. One of those levers is marketing. So you might have experimented with a few things and it may not have worked. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that when you're kind of growing to, say, 20 people, it is difficult. It's always a struggle. But it's not that difficult if you've got a nice product or some nice services. But once you get to 30 to 50, you're starting to compete with a different group. You've got to feed the beast. There's got to be that consistent pipeline and machine that, because now you've got a whole load of people who are going to be made redundant if you don't do the sales job right. And it's at this stage that the founder's network perhaps can't feed the beast, or that perhaps one or two people in the firm can't feed the beast. And so typically at this stage, firms are starting to get very serious about, well, where's the pipeline going to come from next year? And it's then that they do a few things. Some of them is, starting to get juniors to sell a bit more. When I say juniors, I mean anyone other than the partners, training up the partners in selling more, but also looking at marketing and what it can offer.
And do you find when firms and founders reach that point that do they typically try and in-house a lot of that stuff first and then fail, or don't see the success that they want and then look for external suppliers? Or is it a case of actually they know that those skill sets aren't within their business, and actually to do this properly they want to look outside of that and kind of bring in experts externally to support? Or is there no commonality there?
There's a common pattern which accounts for over 50% of at least the 200 odd clients I've had over the last 5 years or so. And that is that initially they will nominate a partner or some partners to do some LinkedIn stuff and potentially even write some case studies or a blog if they were that way inclined. Then that may or may not work, typically it doesn't work as well as it should, because often that value proposition isn't clear. Something that a lot of founders do is around this stage is to do a rebrand, in effect. So you get the clients in to talk about what they like and you work out your value proposition and how that relates to the services you sell. And the consequence of having a decent value proposition is that there's certain themes and messages that come out of that. And then you think, well, what do we do with these themes? Do we really want a partner who could potentially be bringing in £200,000, £300,000 worth, spending a few hours, writing out these messages? Well, the answer is obviously not. So typically what they'll do then is give them to juniors to finish with variable experience and, outcomes. It may not work that well. And then they'll typically look for a marketing person to bring in-house. And then the routes diverge. So either you build that in-house competence of good marketing people that can do the distribution and to some extent the creation of copy, or you have one person or two people in-house and then you outsource the rest to a company like Create Engage.
When you're talking about that value proposition, that thing that's really key for creating the, I suppose the brand to jump off your marketing with, do you have like a silver bullet question that you find helps people to find that value proposition, or is it more of a trial and error?
So my silver bullet question is, why would people buy from you rather than the competition? But one of my clients actually said another one, which I thought was quite nice, which was, if you were in the pub or a cafe and you heard someone talking about your company, this was Assad, who owns Phase 3, you heard someone talking about your company, what would be the best thing they could say about your firm? And I quite like the more emotional engagement with that. I typically run a workshop that is half a day to a day, and the inputs into that will be, what the people inside the firm say, what the services look like, what the strategy is, but also what the clients, most importantly, what the clients think of the firm. And it's really astounding how many consultancies, they might have lots of board advisor, but one of them isn't a client or hasn't been a client, and they don't get their clients in when they're developing services or building a brand or getting their value proposition. I think that's a massive gap for a lot of firms.
Crazy. Yeah. Really interesting.
Do you find that when you go through that process, that actually what a founder thinks about their own business is different to what clients value from their business, and actually is?
Yeah. So every time I have got clients in, or sometimes I'll go and interview clients, or sometimes you bring them into the workshop, or you do a survey or whatever. But yeah, it's always a surprise. And very often people will say, oh, I thought that, our secret sauce was the database that we have or the tool that we've developed. And it's not. It's something completely different. And they've been leaving money on the table because they haven't been pushing that other thing.
That's really interesting, because I do think as well, it's having worked with a lot of firms, consulting firms over the last 3 or 4 years, actually it takes some time to really dig into what is it that makes each individual one unique, because on the surface, a lot of offerings and services are similar, transformation, change, they are broad terms. And actually it's really interesting, and it's a part of the process that I really enjoy when we're building strategies for clients, is actually helping the people who live and breathe that business every day actually take a step back and get excited about their own business again. And I find that a really enjoyable part of the strategy building process.
Yes. And one thing that's missing that often marketing firms don't pick up on, there's no reason why they should, other than it being a good thing to do, is thinking about what the buyer of that firm, and I don't mean the clients, I mean the eventual, typically, half of these firms get sold to, or, growing firms get sold to strategic buyers or private equity, part of a roll up, whatever. You've got to think, if you're too diverse in your services, when a buyer is buying a firm, especially a strategic buyer, they want a niche. And that doesn't mean that you can't have lots of services, but those services have got to have cross-sell, and they've got to be related and strategically aligned and all the rest of it. But if you are too diverse, the buyer is typically going to buy your core thing that fits into their jigsaw puzzle, and they'll get rid of the rest. And when you're growing, you want to be known for X. You don't want to be known for X, Y, and Z unless you're really a large firm. And so that's a really important thing to consider when you're growing a firm. So when you're talking about value proposition and uniqueness, it isn't necessarily that the services need to be unique, because they don't. But there's not just what you do, there's how you do it, your methods, there's where you do it, what's your target, there's who you sell to in terms of the individuals, but there's also how you explain that to the audience. What's your culture like, what are your people like, and all the rest of it. So you don't have to be unique on all of those, but you do need to be able to communicate, why should they buy from you and not from someone else? And that also means that you're saying no to some buyers, or you're eliminating yourself from buyers, because you don't want to be vanilla as a boutique. If you go vanilla, you're going to be competing with PwC or one of the big players, and you don't want to be doing that. And so you want to have a flavor so that some people like you and some people don't. But those that like you are going to be a lot more likely to buy from you than if you're vanilla.
I'm very intrigued to know or if you've ever come across a situation where somebody had decided they weren't going to be vanilla and they'd picked a flavor, but they sort of accidentally picked one that nobody liked. And how did they pivot from that situation?
Generally not.
That's good.
So don't get me wrong, there's bad marketing or there's no marketing. So people have fallen into a presentation of what they're like. And so that is very often, we're talking about ourselves all the time. We're not talking about the clients. Or, we've got a really technical, boring, descriptive website, and we've never thought about branding. So I'm excluding those people that have never done this. But the markets out there are typically very big. There's very few consultancies that don't have boutique consultancies that don't have a potential market of more than 500 buyers. And that's enough to get you to 100 million. So if you say there's a potential market of 500 buyers, we might only, be attractive to, 100 of those, but that's still a hell of a lot of buyers. And that's obviously something you need to think about as well when you're setting up your firm, how many potential buyers there are for your business.
Do you ever find when you're going through that exercise with founders, there's a reluctance to niche down, if that's the right term, because with a fear of drying up the pipeline, and actually it's that, how much of a challenge is that you have to, like a mental challenge to an outlook challenge to overcome, to say actually the long-term benefit is going to be much greater if you niche as opposed to staying vanilla.
Yeah, you're completely right. So I had this conversation yesterday with a European firm that was offering way too many services, and I don't mind a lot of services if it's grown organically and strategically. But what you get this kind of hourglass thing. And so if you imagine the top of the hourglass, when you start a firm, you're so worried about paying the mortgage that you'll do anything that comes through the door. So if you're a marketing firm, you'll do a bit of SEO, and then you'll do a bit of podcast stuff, and you'll do a bit of website stuff. And that's fine because you're experimenting, you're working out what works for you. But over time, you need to start saying no to some of this stuff as you accumulate expertise in a specific area, but also you understand that the market is growing, you can make good money out of this, and it's potentially a scalable service. Then what you do, you get down to that niche eventually, and you go, right, this is what I'm focusing on. This is my brand. This is my value proposition. And then you're at the middle of the hourglass, and then you start to develop strategically. So what you're doing then, instead of having lots of different colored services that don't relate to each other, you're then building out strategically, saying, well, let's do the same service in a new market, or let's develop another service, and this is much more common. Let's develop another service that people are much more likely to buy from the basis of the first service. So there's lots of cross-sell. And so I get a lot of people. So the message here is that if you're in the top part of that hourglass, you've got to get smaller in terms before you can get bigger. So you need to develop that expertise, develop the brand, develop the value proposition. And if you're doing three relatively unrelated things where there's no cross-sell, it's really hard to do that.
I think that's really interesting, and I like the analogy of the hourglass on that as well. And I think we as marketers will definitely say that marketing plays a part in the second part of that, the hourglass, when you start, once you've got your niche sorted, you've got your value proposition, and then you want to kind of take that, you accelerate that growth based on those foundations. Marketing obviously plays a role within that. I'm interested to see, let's kind of fast forward, and hypothetically you're working with an organization who are at that point. How do you recommend they take their, let's assume they haven't got a proven track record in marketing or have no existing marketing function. How do you advise them to incorporate that into their growth strategy? Is there a kind of starting point that you always recommend, a quick win, or is it bespoke and individual to the firm?
So do you mean in terms of, what are the first steps in the marketing journey, or is it more on the operational side? How do we measure this, and what's the common experience of firms?
First steps in the marketing journey.
Okay, so what you'll typically get in a firm is that the founders produce, and I'm talking about firms up to say 70, 80 employees. You'll get a situation where the founders generate 3/4 of the revenue. Obviously, that's no use to a buyer, because as soon as the founders walk out the door, get hit by a car, they don't have an asset. And so that's not a good position to be sold from. So what you'll typically do is get people to start developing the capability of sales in partners. And they do the sort of trusted advisor stuff, long-time relationships. But it's a lot easier for them to do that if they've got good marketing plans. But secondly, when it comes to marketing, my question is how many of these leads are generated from marketing as opposed to the founders and the partner group? And it's really there that marketing is starting to, or should be, proving its worth. But the trouble is that marketing is an experiment. It's not a science. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of number crunching involved and all the rest of it. That's really measuring what works rather than the science of working out what works. And that requires patience. It requires potentially losing money on experiments. You need to learn quickly from what doesn't work. But the trouble is, and you'll know this better than I do, that typically if you decide to start a YouTube channel, or you start to develop white papers, or you start to do a podcast, or whatever you do, it takes 6 months to a year for that thing to even start showing traction. And a lot of founders don't necessarily have the money or inclination to wait that long.
That's absolutely a challenge that we're familiar with. And that expectation management of it's not a tap that you turn on, it's foundations that you build and you test and learn and iterate along the way. And in 12, 18 months, all being well, you'll have a very focused marketing strategy that is delivering the results that you want it to. And obviously that differs for every firm. But that expectation management and helping founders come on that journey with you is a challenge.
Yeah. And it can be, I mean, I feel for you guys because, sometimes you're having that conversation, and saying, look, we've tried this and it's been a year and you've had a 7% uptick in listeners to your podcast, but has it generated any more sales? And if the answer is no, then you've got to go back and have that conversation saying, hey, why don't we try SEO? And that's really tough. So it's, I feel for you guys in some ways. It's not an easy, but to do it well, the key thing is, and you'll know this again, the key thing is consistent generation and distribution of quality content. And it's the quality that's key here. There's no point, and I know you guys do this. I'm not a big fan of marketing agencies coming up with the idea and executing blogs and all the rest of it from scratch. I think, I think the partners should really be the ones generating the idea and the priorities and all the rest of it. And then marketing should be helping them execute that and then taking on the burden that marketing is great at, which is around distribution and measurement of some of that.
I agree. I think that is an approach we find typically with clients. When we have clients who buy into that approach, that's when it works really well, because actually it's playing to strengths in terms of leveraging the knowledge, the experience, the expertise of the partners and founders within that organization. But then I say us, but marketing in general, the expertise around how can we amplify and distribute that content and do so in a way that looks premium as well, because I think actually it's the perception. Marketing plays a large role in the perception of a brand, of course, and actually when done well, externally a firm can be perceived as much larger than they actually are if they've got an efficient marketing function and like you say, like constant content distribution. There's feedback we've had from clients before that once they've started conversations with prospective clients, and actually when they understand more about the organization, they've had the feedback that, oh, we thought you were much larger than you are, not in a negative way, but from your marketing output, we thought you were much larger. And I think that's great, because that's actually, it elevates those sort of boutique and smaller firms to matching the output of firms that are much bigger from a marketing perspective.
Yeah, and the internet is a horrible shouting match, and what you don't want to be doing is standing beside the road shouting at cars as they drive past very quickly. You want to have the lay-by that they can pull into, or you want to be distinctive in your signage, or you want to have a message that's important and resonates, so that people slow down, they stop the scroll perhaps and listen. And it's not an easy thing to achieve. And there's, as you all know, and I'm sure you clear up the mess from a lot of these people, there's a lot of bad marketeers out there who, they're charging vast amounts of cash, but they don't really get that messaging bit right, which in my view is crucial. And it's why I'm a massive fan of thought leadership in consultancies.
I think as well, it comes down to, and it's a conversation I like to have earlier on with clients rather than later, is what does success look like from a marketing perspective? Because it's very easy to get 100, 150, 200 engagements on a LinkedIn post if you put agree ? At the end of the post, because it seems to be what everyone does. But actually, are those 150, 200 people, of those, how many are actually going to be prospective clients? Potentially zero. I'd much rather, as you say, create the lay-by for someone to pull into. I'm taking that as a gated ebook or something that someone can download and kind of start a conversation with. That's much more valuable. And I think understanding what success looks like to clients and also educating clients on what success should look like, I think is a really big part of that journey as well from a marketing perspective.
Yeah, definitely agreed.
So we've spoken a lot about how you advise firms and what founders need to consider when it comes to marketing their consultancies. And I really liked what you just said then about thought leadership and how key that is. And I think that's really obvious in the way that you've built your personal brand as well. And I know you're not a big fan of that term, but you released a book, you've launched a podcast, You've got 20,000 followers on LinkedIn. I'm sorry to be the one to tell you, you have an amazing personal brand.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind of you. You're right. I used to loathe the phrase personal brand. But what happens is that your brand develops when you give people value. And, I have never thought about my brand at all, which probably accounts for some of the swearing and, rough faces you see on my LinkedIn posts. But I do think very, very deeply about providing value. And in some ways, my move to academia from corporate consultancy was me saying, okay, I want to give value to students. And then with my research and some of that small firms owned by friends that I was helping over a few years, I wanted to share, because there's so much bad advice about growing and exiting your firm done by, very often there'll be, this spotty 20-year-old in a cheap suit who's never been anywhere near growing a firm or anything like that. So I really wanted to share on the basis of providing value to people. And what has come as a consequence of that is, quite a loyal following. I've got my boutique leaders club and people seem to, enjoy it. But I'm very keen on, firstly, sharing the value I have, but also enabling value between business owners so that they can help each other.
Is that something you would recommend to other? I appreciate it's different, but the success that you've had from that, as you said, organically, in that sense of, I imagine there has been, it has helped grow your business and your brand, and that's supported and brought in a lot of leads from it. Is that something that you actively would recommend when you're talking to founders around marketing strategies? And I think I'll pause there because there's two questions in there, but is that something you actively recommend?
Yes, and not just for founders, but also for partners. I think it's increasingly important that a partner becomes, to use a phrase, a visible expert. They're all experts. Maybe they're not as niche down as a partner should be, but they're not visible. And so partners almost need to start acting like the old traditional partners, that they run their own practice and that they become the visible expert in a specific area. So I'm very keen on that happening. The challenge there is with founders is that you can go too far. So if you become the face of the company, you become the voice of the company, you run the podcast and all the rest of it, buyer's going to look at that and think, well, they're generating all the leads. So I would rather the partner team were doing it than the founder was doing it.
And that was exactly the second half of my question, which was from a buyer's perspective. I was going to say, I imagine actually having more faces, projected externally and seen as experts is a positive, because it's not all concentrated through a single founder.
Yeah, and there are exceptions, but your average successful consultancy founder that has grown the firm to, say, 50 people isn't usually going to be a shy, retiring violet that doesn't like the limelight a bit, because they've managed to sell to get to that size. And so, the temptation to, set up your own podcast and, it's very strong. But sometimes it just concentrates this view, the founder is all important to the firm, both for buyers of the firm, potential buyers of the firm, but also from the rest of the partner group who perhaps, are shying away from doing what they should be doing because you've got this dominant owner in charge.
Absolutely. And it's something I find really interesting when we're working with our clients as well, actually, in terms of there's always or often an initial reluctance to put yourself out there from a marketing perspective. And it's amazing how many people actually really enjoy it once they're told they should or they could or the benefits of, and then they're away. And it's brilliant to see. And it's something that makes our lives very easy when you've got people that are very engaged in content creation.
Yeah, but, and there is a but here, it's no excuse for not picking up the phone. So a lot of partners will say, oh, I've been very good on the business development side. I've written this blog and I've done these LinkedIn posts and all the rest of it. And I say, well, how many times did you pick up the phone today to an ex-client? I'll say, well, I've been busy doing that thought leadership stuff. And it's not either or. It's got to be both. And the easiest way to get sales, number one, to ask for referrals, and number two, to expand the business that you're already doing with clients. And so if you're not doing that for your bread and butter, there's no point trying to become a visible expert because you're too scared to pick up the phone and sell. And unfortunately, that is true of even some partners.
that really speaks to a lot of the conversations I think we have with clients quite regularly, is around those touch points of, how do you know when marketing is proving that return on investment? And if you don't have those multiple touch points, it's not just you just do one thing. You can't just do LinkedIn, you can't just do blogs, you can't just do the website. It has to be multiple touch points. And I think that what you just said then really speaks to that as well.
So this is just my experience. You're way more expert than I am at marketing. But my view is that that's true of larger firms. So once you get to 100, 200. So my personal advice to smaller firms is do one thing and stick at it until you know whether it works or not. Because if you're, let's imagine you're a 50-person firm, you've got a founder, you've got 3 partners, and you've kind of forked out for half a marketing person, or maybe an agency that's working with you. If you do a blog and YouTube and a podcast and SEO and thought leadership, you're going to do all of them badly, unless you're chucking loads of money. Because the partners just don't have time to push that. So, and also the messages get mixed up. So if you get a sale, someone might say, oh, I've listened to your podcast and I've done that, and I've listened to your YouTube and I've read your articles, but you don't really know what's working. So with smaller firms, I always say stick to one thing until you know whether it works or whether it doesn't. If it works, we keep it, measure it, improve it. And then once that's established, then we say, okay, how can we reuse and improve this? So, a webinar might lead to, various videos, which could be converted into a podcast and a blog, which then you might do SEO on, then you might cut up a bit for LinkedIn. The key thing is, for me, is patience, working out whether it works or not.
I think you mentioned a couple of times there being patient and understanding if it works. And I'm quite interested to dig into the if it works, or find out, until you know it works, which to me speaks to measurement and measures of success. How do you help founders or businesses, firms, understand what is and isn't working from a marketing perspective?
I mean, you engage the input KPIs and the output KPIs, and the input KPIs, all the boring stuff that, how many views, how many likes, how many shares, how many listeners, how many visits, and all the rest of it. The stuff, most marketing firms know very, very well. The tricky one is the output. As you said earlier, there's no point having 1 million likes if nobody buys your service. So when the partners are having that conversation, when you're moving from sort of a prospect to a lead, ideally then to a client, I guess there's 2 things. There's the quantitative feedback in terms of, how did you find us, first of all? How did you engage with us? I mean, it's probably going to be a recommendation, but if it's not, then, what did you engage with us from? And sometimes, this, sometimes you can get a bit sophisticated with your marketing and you can actually follow someone's journey, but most of the time you can't, because people drop off or they have different identities when they come online. But then there's qualitative feedback, which is the partners saying, oh, that ebook that you helped us produce, I'm using that, with clients and they love it and all the rest of it. And just because it's qualitative doesn't mean it's not important. So it's just capturing some of that stuff. And that means that, and this is another one of my bugbears, that means there needs to be a really close relationship between partners and marketing. Marketing should serve the needs of partners and advise and help and all the rest of it. It shouldn't be the tail wagging the dog, which I've seen many times where there's a good marketing department who are very, very bright and able, and they've gone off producing content that the partners know nothing about and haven't asked for, and is probably of no use to them. And very often that content is too generic, or it's got the wrong tone, or it's not speaking to the right clients. So, I'm a big fan of encouraging partners and the marketing team to get as close as possible.
I think that's a really good point. And I think I mentioned it earlier around playing to strengths, and you mentioned as well around the webinar approach and repurposing that into videos and blogs and leveraging that content for different channels and in different formats. And I think that's a really interesting way of doing things as well, because actually a partner's time is busy and the marketing part of that is small, but actually the best use of that time is to potentially create a webinar that then can be repurposed by the marketing team, and you then know and have the confidence that whatever goes out has come from the partner. It's just been repurposed to the marketing team. And I think that's a really sensible approach. I think what that kind of leads on to my next question, which was, I really agree with the, however you want to phrase it, the sort of do one thing, do it well, walk before you can run, what are those things? Is there a place that you typically recommend that firms start? What is that one thing that they should do first? And is there a single thing, or does it differ by firm?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So it doesn't differ by firm, it differs by type of firm. So I'm a big fan of David Meister's categorization of professional service firms into brains, experience, he called it grey beards, I think he called it, but times have changed, thank God, and process-based firms. And those types of firms have different marketing needs. And I won't break them down here, but what a brains firm, you're solving unique problems for a client with very bright people, and they're unique problems for you as well, then your marketing is going to be very different to someone that, in effect advises on outsourced processes or, managed services or something. So I guess that's the first thing. I'm a big fan of thought leadership, and I mean good, high quality, original research thought leadership that can be reused and reused and reused. It's expensive. It involved, and it's a good thing and a bad thing, but you can also involve clients in it. You can do surveys, or you could have a senior client perhaps acting as a steering committee for the piece, or you could do it jointly with the client and then go to a conference and give the paper or submit it for an award or something. But I think with most, not all, but I think with most consultancy firms, it pays to develop really nice, accessible thought leadership that speaks to the concerns of your clients. It has lots of benefits, from the quality of your brand through to, developing lead magnets, good marketing material, but also, most of all, showing that you really understand the problem better than your clients do.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I suppose talking around that, starting on doing fewer things well and focusing on what works for your firm. Obviously in marketing, and particularly in digital marketing, there are trends and channels and platforms that come and go, not all of which are suitable for professional services marketing at all. One I think that is really interesting, I know one is that you're keen on, is AI, and I think it's a topic of conversation that is everywhere at the moment. And I know you have experience of using it in many different forms. Do you see that there's a benefit in professional services marketing embracing AI? And if so, what? Is it content creation? Is it other?
Sure. Okay. So firstly, a little bit about my background here. So for the last 2 years, I love shiny new things. And the latest one was AI. I got into it about 2 years ago through a friend. I've implemented a couple of AI solutions, believe it or not. I can't code, but for consultancies, I've built a few AI bots for my students and for my clients, which I've done free of charge, really. And as you say, there are always trends and there are waves, and there's a huge amount of hype about AI at the moment. But the reason I'm writing a book on it at the moment, of AI in professional service firms. The reason I'm putting that effort in is because I do genuinely believe it's transformative. In effect, we're 1 year in from GPT-3 being launched and generative AI becoming popular. Don't get me wrong, for the last 60 years, AI has been there in some form, but the processing power and the cost has been too much for it to be generative. Now we're seeing generative AI. It's obviously a threat and an opportunity for a lot of professions, and one of those is marketing. So there are hundreds of generative AI apps now, and I'm guessing you guys are being bombarded by people that want to sell you things. But the key thing from my perspective is we are 1 year in, and if firms, including marketing firms, aren't getting ahead of this, then in 3 years' time, they're going to die in the face of the firms that are ahead of this, because there are huge opportunities to, and it's not just content creation, it's ideation. So, I used it the other day. Okay, so when I take on a new client, I give them a 300 question questionnaire. It's a huge piece of work for them, but it's really worth it because it enables me to understand the firm, and it makes them realize that, what some of their weaknesses are. After I've received that, I analyze it, and then I use that as a basis to interview the owners. Off of that, I can then produce what I see as a useful prioritized plan of action, and then we have a conversation about my ideas. What I did for the first time this week was I did it manually, the way I've always done it, and then I did it through AI. So in effect, I gave it the transcript of the interview and I gave it the answers to the questions. I anonymized the document before I did it, and it produced pretty much the same prioritized plan that I had done. Now, I have been studying, teaching, writing about, and practicing consultancy for 25, if not more, years. And that was kind of scary. Now, it's not magic, it's predictive, it's got limitations, it hallucinates and all the rest of it. But this is after year one. So, ideation, it can come up with ideas and it can prioritize really well. And that's in terms of, I've used it for value proposition work as well. I've obviously done it myself, and then I've generated a whole load of value proposition statements for a client. The ones they liked most were the AI ones, most of them. And when I told them it came from AI, their jaws dropped. And these aren't sort of naive, these aren't people from the valleys or something. They're bright, experienced, tech savvy people. So it's ideation first of all. What ideas? Number two, analysis of the market and analysis for competitors. I was looking at a nice little app at the moment, which is around competitor analysis, and it does it on the basis of the competitors' websites, their SEO, their output from LinkedIn, any marketing stuff they produce, and all the rest of it. But it has the capability not just to scrape that data, but to analyze it and present it back as well. Value proposition creation, identification of themes, and then you get to the content production side of things. So don't get me wrong, at the moment, I wouldn't use it for content production. I've tried training a bot on my own material to write stuff for me. I don't feel it captures my voice. And for me, my voice is everything. The only marketing in inverted commas I do is on LinkedIn. And so if any of my followers get a feeling that that isn't authentic, then there's going to be a problem. However, I have no doubt at all that in 2 years, it's going to be capable of my voice, literally. So me, avatar, my voice, my type of thinking, and the type of words I would use. The game we're in then is something very, very different and something very scary in my view. So you've got the content creation, which I don't think is there, but then you've got the reuse. So as you say, you might have a webinar, and there's AI now that can cut up the webinar in roughly the right places. It can transcribe the webinar perfectly and then turn it into a blog. The blog might not be 100%, but it's going to be 70% of the way there. Then you've got that you could take parts of those blogs and animate a person to speak some of the words for you. Or you could turn it into a video and it can do that automatically. Again, it's not 100% of the way there. It's kind of 70% of the way there, but it's not going to be long before it's 80 to 90% of the way there. And then finally, you've got distribution and measurement of the distribution. And you know as well as I do, there's many tools out there that will allow you to automate, allow you to measure and improve automatically the distribution of content in a much more targeted way. So, for example, rather than the standard CRM approach, which is, Dear Joe, I hope all is well at joeomani.com. And that side of things, what you are getting is writing that is in a style of my personality. So, for example, I tested something a few days ago that if I write a LinkedIn post, if I write a LinkedIn message or an email message, the AI will correct me based on the personality of that person. Now, that was interesting. I haven't subscribed to it. And the reason for it is that the big insight for me was that despite everything I tell my clients, I still write in my own voice. I don't amend things for other people. So there's all these different stages, and AI is at the moment very task focused. So it can do each one of those things, sometimes brilliantly, sometimes pretty badly. Pretty bad stuff will probably get a bit better. What it can't do at the moment is link those tasks up very well. There's this new agent stuff where you've got a series of different AI bots talking to each other and helping each other. Those are a bit better at doing process stuff, but it's still some way off of saying, instead of having to do everything at a task level, just saying, do everything you can to get me that client. Or even just, find out which clients I want and then contact them in a way that's going to get their attention best. So we're years away from that. I don't know if we'll ever get there, but there is huge amounts of potential. So I've realized I've talked for a long time on that, but I'm quite passionate and interested in it.
It's fascinating. And I think actually there's a lot of talk of AI out there at the moment, but it's really interesting to hear from you because you've tested it, incorporated it into what you do, and are seeing the benefits and the pitfalls of doing so. And I think actually, I agree with you completely. I think it's a case of embrace it in the right way now, or everyone else is going to, and the next few years may look slightly tricky if you don't. And I think that embrace it in the right way is important, because I think there's a lot of the fear of the unknown is stopping people and firms doing that. But actually, there is a lot of tangible benefit from taking the leap.
Yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of marketing firms experimenting very heavily over the next 2 years with automated as much as possible, and then provide an experienced marketeer to give an overview of it or to sit alongside it. Eventually, that may be, why do we need a senior marketer at all? I don't know. I think management consultants are a little bit better off because organizations as entities, if you want to be philosophical about it, are much more complex than most other entities. Even compared to a body, if you're talking about doctors, organizations are more complex, they're less predictable, they're more open. And so I think management consultancy as a profession is probably going to be one of the last professions to be disrupted by AI. But I don't have any doubt that it will be disrupted to some extent, and already is being done so.
And AI aside, if we take the next 12 months, 18 months, you can choose the timescale. What does that look like for professional services firms, and particularly the marketing of professional services firms? So what other challenges and opportunities do heads of marketing, founders or partners that are looking after marketing need to be aware of, and what might they encounter?
Okay, so there's different timescales to different parts of this answer. One of them is that 2023 has been horrible for most boutique consulting firms. And the faster moving ones will have changed their messaging. So they'd be focusing more on cost savings, efficiency, and phrases like that, rather than the whole discretionary spend messaging that really won't be working at the moment. I'd say 3/4 of the boutique consulting market have struggled this year. Next year, I believe it's going to pick up. And I only say that because of my knowledge historically of what happens to consulting revenues over the last 150 years. Very rare to find a dip that lasts for more than a year. Even 2021, 2008, we've had a lot of recessions over the last few years. Only lasted for a year. So I'm really hoping the consulting industry picks up. So I think there's one thing around messaging. There's the whole AI thing that we've talked to death about. There's the big ongoing trends for the consulting industry. So number one, there has been an explosion of boutique professional service firms, partly because of the collapsing cost of enabling services, IT, marketing, building websites and that type of stuff, but also partly because clients are getting pissed off with the big four and McKinsey, Bain and Boston charging them $2,000 an hour for a load of MBA students who are doing a cut and paste job. The other big trend is that consulting is getting more and more competitive whilst clients are getting more and more savvy. So what you've seen over the last 10 years is kind of a moving apart of two poles of consultancy: high value, high cost, and more commodified, low value, low cost services. And I can only see that as increasing. So positioning yourself in high value, getting good training programs for your people, really building in the development, looking at how technology can help you. I think there's opportunities there, but there's also dangers for firms that are in that sort of low cost commodified space, which I think is only going to get worse and worse. And that means that consulting firms need to continually reinvent themselves. Not continually, once every 5 to 7 years, you need to have a really, really deep think. Are we still selling business process re-engineering to a market that doesn't exist anymore? Are we using the phrase total quality management and lean when everyone has moved on to agile and AI or whatever? So there is this thing around reinvention as well. I could go on, but I won't.
I think one final question from me. If a firm or a founder of a firm is listening to this podcast and are looking to accelerate their marketing in 2024, what's the one piece of advice that you would give them?
So founders aren't interested in accelerating their marketing, obviously. They're interested in accelerating their sales, and they might come to the realization that marketing could be useful for doing this. I think marketing to some extent is like management consultancy, in that if you build a team of internal management consultants, they can be very good for a while, but eventually they don't have that exposure to lots of different clients and lots of different ideas that allows them to stay ahead of the game. So one thing, and I'm not just saying this because you guys are here, but I do think it's important to engage with experts who know what the most exciting and useful stuff is in marketing. And that doesn't mean that you need to outsource your whole marketing function on 10, 15 grand a month. But it does mean that you need, depending on your size and depending what type of firm you are, you need to know where the biggest bang for your buck is going to be. And it's really marketing professionals that are going to do that. Now, don't get me wrong, marketing professionals, and as with any professional service provider, is always going to want you to spend a bit more money rather than less money. But they'll also know that if you go to them with a budget of 3 grand a month, that in order to maximize the impact of that, these are the likely things that are going to work, or at least to start experimenting with. The worst thing you can do is this kind of scattergun approach where we try everything for 2 months and expect it to work. And, giving partners responsibility for writing blogs and distributing content and all the rest of it isn't the way to go. So I realized that budgets can be a concern, especially if you're trying to maximize your EBITDA. But you've got to think in the long term, what you want to be doing is building that marketing engine that hands over seamlessly and supports your sales engine. So I'm all about intellectual property, building the systems and processes that will allow you to grow the asset of the firm. And 2 of those processes are your marketing machine and your sales machine, and they need to be seamless in terms of supporting each other.
A brilliant place to finish. Thank you very much. Well, Joe, thanks very much for that. Really, really enjoyed the conversation and hope you did too.
Thanks to both of you. Yeah, really interesting. It's nice to have a bit of space to think about the marketing side because, in terms of what I spend, it probably accounts for a quarter, if not a third of conversations that I'm having with owners. So it's really useful to take a bit of time out and think about it. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Today's episode is brought to you by Create Engage, the specialist digital marketing agency for the disruptive management consultancy. Now, for long-time listeners, you will probably already know who we are. You may have even heard one of our ads on a previous episode of this podcast. But for those of you who don't, here is a short introduction. At Create Engage, we help you create an effective marketing strategy for your consultancy, a strategy that will resonate with your target clients. And then we support you by delivering the campaigns you need to turn that strategy into a reality, helping you to build your brand, raise your profile with your prospective clients, and ultimately generate return on investment from your marketing activity. Now, I could tell you about many of the great clients that we work with and the results we've delivered for them. But instead, I'm going to do something much more powerful and something that I would recommend you do for your own marketing. I'm going to let our clients do the talking for us. If you are currently thinking about marketing for your consultancy, you're going to want to listen to this.
Create Engage started the process for us. They managed it end to end. They came up with some really creative ideas and we were really happy with the work that they did, which meant that we could just focus on running the business. Not only did we start conversations with clients that we hadn't spoken to before, but also there was tangible return on investment by some work that we were given.
They've helped right from the initial shaping of the idea through to helping us work out what our end goal was. They've supported us with the visual identity and our positioning of the brand.
We've had an immediate expansion of our network and have initiated a raft of new conversations with owners, CEOs in target client organisations, and has led to us winning new projects already.
One of the greatest compliments, I guess, is that one of our competitors even said that they really like what we're doing with marketing and they wish they could be doing something as good.
So from our perspective, we couldn't recommend Create Engage any more than this.
I would certainly recommend Create Engage if you're a consulting firm. They really understand consultancies and the sort of challenges we face. And I don't think you're going to get much better marketing anywhere else.
So I wouldn't hesitate to recommend Create Engage. They did a really good job for us.
So if you're looking for an agency that can help you achieve the results that our clients just described, then head to our website, createengage.co.uk, where you can find out more about how we support consulting firms like you. You can download our latest ebook and you can get in touch to talk about how we can help you take your consultancy to the next level through digital marketing. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Climbing Consulting. If you have any guest recommendations, comments, ideas, thoughts on how I can make this show better for you, just drop me an email. It's nick@createengage.co.uk, and I really look forward to hearing from you.